trade deadline is just 2 days away. Charlie and I are going to give you everything we know and everything we think about Rasmus Ristolainen, Scott Laughton, and all of Danny Briere's trade deadline plans. So watch what's coming up next here on PHLY Flyers. Hear those winds blowing outside, Chuck. The big question, are they trade winds a-blowing? So we got that update from Darren Dreger last night. 8 teams have at least called or inquired about Scott Laughton. There's first-round picks in play. Saw about an hour ago, Kevin Kurz put out an article what he's hearing about Laughton and Risto ahead of the trade deadline. Reading this article, he's talking about the Jets, the Maple Leafs, teams that could potentially be serious. It seems as if the Flyers are going to make a consequential trade, chances are, if it's just one, it's Scott Laughton. Is that what you're feeling right now?
Yeah. That's been the sense I've had for, I would say, over a week. I think with Ristolainen, really what it boils down to is, number one, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of interest, especially given the fact that the Flyers don't want to retain. You saw a couple days ago, I believe it was Anthony DeMarco reported that, well, the Flyers might be willing to retain. That screams to me the Flyers aren't getting many takers on the full retention. So they put out there through DeMarco that, well, maybe we'd be interested if we're retaining, if you give us enough. They're trying to develop a market for Ristolainen, and it doesn't seem like it's there. And I also just don't think the Flyers really, I wouldn't say they don't want to trade Ristolainen. I would say that there are more people in the brain trust that are iffy on the idea of trading Ristolainen. I got the strong sense from John Tortorella that he doesn't want them to trade Ristolainen.
He said it.
I also get the sense from Brad Shaw that he doesn't want them to trade Ristolainen. Now, Shaw mostly is interacting with Torts, but Shaw coaches the defense, and they have a lot of respect for Shaw. We both know from both watching on television and personal knowledge of this man that Keith Jones absolutely loves Rasmus Ristolainen, loves the guy. So he's another member of the brain trust that probably isn't itching to get rid of Ristolainen. So I think it might be kind of with Risto a look of the coaches don't want to move him. Members of the brain trust don't want to move him. The interest hasn't been there to a ridiculous degree. And, well, I suspect Briere is probably more open to moving him than some of the other members of the brain trust. It's easy for Briere to just say, well, we got him for 2 more years. We don't need to trade him at the deadline. We can wait. Maybe teams would be more willing to take on the full salary in the summer when everybody has more cap space versus at the deadline when most teams have limited amounts of space available to take on a guy. Laughton seems to me to be the more likely guy. And I still don't think it's a certainty he gets moved. I think a lot of people who are very online were shocked to hear Brian Boucher on the broadcast basically say he doesn't think they're going to move, because if you're on Twitter, you've convinced yourself that there's no way Laughton isn't getting moved because you're reading these rumors. I think Boucher is probably a little bit too certain that he's not going to get moved, but I also think that Drager's report makes it seem too certain that he is going to get moved. I still think this is a true 50-50 thing. I suspect that some of these leaks are coming from the Flyers trying to push up the market. That's my guess.
That would be the most, who's the Maple Leafs? I can't imagine out there oh yeah, we've offered a first, but there's so many teams involved. It's going to have to be a first. Fraser Minton, half of our, I doubt another team is trying to drive up the price. If it's, yeah, man, there's 8 teams involved. There's first round picks. That has to be the Flyers, just in terms of, having a little bit of media literacy, just a tiny little bit.
It screams the Flyers.
Yeah.
That screams that, Danny or somebody in the organization is putting that out there to try to increase urgency on the part of the teams in the mix or on the outskirts of the mix to say, hey, we got a lot of offers. So if you want them, you better get your best one in soon.
So this, just given the way this is being reported, and again, I don't think it's a certainty either. I think it's, I hate to say better than 50-50 because there's no such thing in life. But
everything's 50-50.
Everything's 50-50, Charlie. But I'm just looking at looking at the way this is unfolding. If there are 8 teams involved, now we can talk about how serious each is.
Degree of involvement, yeah.
Yeah, the New Jersey Devils, okay. Also, the Flyers and Devils have made 3 trades ever, and none of them have been of any consequence, basically. They went 30 years between trades or something. So we'll see if they're a real player, but You look at uh, Toronto and their cap situation. Maybe they need retention. And if that's the case, hey, man, it's going to cost you a lot more than whatever that initial asking price was of, yeah, we want a first. Oh, no, no, no. If we're paying, it's going to be a first and something else.
Yeah.
And you look at Winnipeg, like they love guys with terms. So maybe that works for them. Maybe they're a team. And reading Kevin Kurz's article, they have some center depth in their organization. Just thinking about potential returns, do you think it would behoove the Flyers to look more at picks or players right now, like either young NHLers or prospects who are looking to graduate sometime in the near future?
I know a lot of people are more interested in prospects at this point. The reason why I'm not necessarily super into the idea of trading for a prospect is because I don't know if you'd be able to get back anybody I'm terribly excited about. If you like, if the trade was to Winnipeg and they got back Brad Lambert, a guy who's a high upside player who, if he hits, could be a legitimate scorer at the NHL level, I'm cool with that. That makes sense to me. If you're trading in for Fraser Minton, who, even if everything breaks right, he's a solid 3C. His two big weaknesses are, lack of high end skill and lack of high end skating ability, lack of really good skating ability. I'm more iffy on that because it's like, I don't know. They've drafted a bunch of those guys. Do you really need to trade for one just to be more certain that you're going to get a 3C long term? In that instance, I'd rather them prioritize trying to get a 2026 first round pick because they have enough 2025s at this point. But
Certainly.
if you can get a 2026 for a draft that apparently is shaping up to look better than this year's to give you more ammo for next year's draft, that would excite me more than a B level Fraser Minton type prospect. But if you can get a big swing prospect, a guy with plausible upside who maybe is a bit riskier, I might be more open to that because I just think the Flyers are in a position now where they have enough guys in their prospect pipeline who are high floor guys. I think they should be looking to add high ceiling guys. And if you can get a guy like that, I'm more interested than going for low floor guys like Fraser Minton.
That makes a ton of sense. I also, just looking at future draft picks, we have said all along that if this thing is going to work and it's not going to be like an 8-year project, they're going to have to make some trades. They're going to have to go out and acquire some guys. And whether that's even in a scenario, my dream scenario of an offer sheet, well, you have to give up your own picks. You'd like some left after you
Yeah,
do that, or you trade other picks to
that's a good
get
point.
players. Whatever it is, the ammo could never hurt. So I still think I'm kind of on that draft pick, on that draft pick train, unless it's somebody's. I can open up their elite prospects page and see some ridiculous numbers, and then I'll be happy. But that's pretty much that. Before we wrap this up, Chuck, it's going to be quick. I just want to ask about any other potential moves because I think there are some guys with maybe a chance to be traded, like Erik Johnson. I don't even know if he wants to be, but you look at a guy, it might be the last season of his career, expiring contract, veteran. Maybe he wants to chase another cup. Yegor Zamula, I just know a lot of people on Twitter want him traded.
Yeah, that's more of a Twitter creation than
Yeah,
actual reality.
I'm just throwing him out there. Like, yeah, it doesn't really make sense just in terms of like the team control. You're not going to give up a cheap guy probably with some NHL experience. But Andrei Kuzmenko, we've talked back and forth about that. Or this thing that I'm thinking about right now, maybe moving on from an Adam Ginning or Elliot Desnoyers or an Ula Lixell, kind of like they did Wade Allison. Like, listen, we've given you some time. You're okay, but we need the roster spot, or we would like that roster spot open for, when Denver, Barkey, and Oliver Bonk join the team next year or whatever.
That's always possible. AHL deals happen all the time or in and around the trade deadline. As you said, we saw it last year with the Wade Allison for Dennis Gurianov deal. Ultimately, that proved inconsequential for both
Yeah,
sides. But hey, it's possible. The Flyers do have a deep defense prospect pool in terms of guys that have, let's say, bottom half of the lineup NHL upside. Maybe they'd look to clear out one of those spots. I don't think they would trade Lixell just because he is a really good AHL player, and I
that's
think
true.
they'd like to see the Phantoms at least make the playoffs, if not make a little bit of noise. Like, you trade Lixell, he is their best player by a significant margin at the AHL level. So I'm not quite expecting that, but it's an interesting thought that maybe there could be a smaller deal, with minor league guys looming at the deadline. Erik Johnson, I know he said on 97.5 that he'd had some conversations with Danny Briere about whether he might want to move. I have to think that's at least going to be explored if it's something he's interested in. That said, he enjoys it here. So I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world for him if he has to stay. He's already won his cup. It's not like he's chasing, not like he's an old guy without a cup. He's got his
Yeah.
ring. He's happy with this team. He's happy with his teammates. So if they can find him a spot on a team that has legitimate designs on a cup, maybe. But beyond that, I don't think it's necessarily something they're going to force unless he went to Danny Briere last week and said, send me to a good team. I want to experience a cup run.
Keeping Kuzmenko, I'm not saying like extending him anytime soon. They might, but I don't think he's getting traded at this point. He seems
looks
like
good.
He
looks good.
He looks good, and like that
Yeah.
was, hey, if he looks good, trade him. That was my idea at the beginning, but kind of just seems like they want to keep him around for the, to be a buddy for Mishkov, and also to like help this offense that doesn't have a whole bunch of offensive oriented players.
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. It wouldn't blow me away if they moved him, and he's certainly making a good case for himself as a guy who, if you want to toss the Flyers a third-round pick and have the Flyers retain 50%, he's playing well. He's looking good offensively. But I think the Flyers are intrigued by him. So they really might just decide, let's keep him and decide if we want to sign him to a 1 or 2 year extension in the summer.
All right, and speaking of extensions, around this time, teams make their subtractions, they make their additions. We see, okay, we know what the cap's going to be, cost certainty, so we kind of know what our budget is. You think we could see a Foerster, Cates, or York extension in the coming days?
I'd be shocked. I've heard nothing to imply that that is looming. I just don't think the Flyers are in any rush. I guess you never know. Some could come together quick. I know they talked to York earlier on in the season about like the rough parameters of a deal, but I just don't get the sense that it's a top priority. The top priority right now is the trade deadline.
All right, and that is our top priority. We will be with you through the trade deadline Friday, 2-hour live show. So make sure you're following us right here on the YouTube page, 2 to 4 p.m. On our YouTube channel. Make sure you tune in for that. Follow the podcast as well. Just search PHLY Flyers and follow us on Twitter at PHLY_Flyers. All right, I am Bill Matz. That is Charlie O'Connor. Until next time, let's go Flyers.